Hey, welcome back. This week I am on a quest to continue this engine rebuild. I'm going to be looking at these 912 heads, find out what they need so I can run this engine. Fingers crossed.
Garage time.
All right, here are the heads that I told you I had from a running engine, and I don't know the condition other than that the engine was running. So I'm going to be taking these apart, cleaning them up, checking for all their wear limits, and then pressure testing them to make sure that they can hold some compression. There's a couple interesting things to note about these heads. These are the 912 heads with the air injection system. So if you look carefully, you can see that these have been plugged with some kind of bolts of some kind. This is from 1968. Wasn't a good idea, so most people plug them up. Hopefully there's no cracks in these heads. I'll be checking for that. They are matching heads. They have a stamp on here, 61.5. That's the volume of the cylinder head dish. This head has a matching 61.5, so that's good, or at least from the matching engine. None of the exhaust studs are broken off on all 8 studs. And the sealing surfaces here look pretty decent. There's no grooves or major trouble in them. So we look like we're off to a good start. Okay, this is a universal valve spring compressor, and these work okay on some engines. It actually works on these intake valves, but it tends to slip off the coil, and it's a little bit dangerous. I don't really like using it. And then they don't work at all on these exhaust valves because it's so close to this housing right here that it just interferes. It's actually dangerous. It could bend the valve or scratch up the head. Get ready for another of one of Tom's wacky contraptions. Check this one out. This bar here is supported on my welding table with some clamps and then these uprights with a couple different holes in the side. This lower hole is for the exhaust valves and this is for the intake valve. And then the same is true on this side of the table. Okay, this is the portion that actually touches the valve. This is an electrical conduit with a couple slices taken out of it, and it's pinned onto this fulcrum so that this can go under the bar like so, and when I push down, it's gonna push down on the valves. All right, and this block of wood is also important too, because as I push the valve retainer down, it actually pushes the valve down too. So on this side, I have this wooden slug that goes in the combustion chamber, and it just prevents the valves from really moving too far. So the head sits up against this portion. This goes under the bar. And you can hear it break loose. Oops. And I can reach in here with a magnet and hopefully grab those retainers. There's one. There's two. Now I'm also keeping track with this cardboard box. The heads are stamped with, one's a 75 stamp, one's a 74. So I'm gonna put this retainer and valve spring on the exhaust valve, which is this one right here. This is the 75 head. Okay, this guy's slipping a little too much, so I'm gonna put a little clamp on here. There's still one shim on this exhaust valve that I just can't pull out. I'm gonna have to probably do some cleaning and prying to get that one out. But this head is now totally stripped down. The end of the valve here looks really good. There's no pitting, no defects on the end. So this is a very accurate micrometer. It goes out to 5 places on the decimal. Okay, 3.922, 3.922, 3.922. So this valve, in my opinion, is good to go. We'll definitely need to clean it off, and the end is fine, no mushrooming. This is an ATE valve. I think these have sodium inside to help with the heat conductivity. 3048. So I'm gonna put this one back in the box. It is good to go. Okay, I wrote some of the numbers down of the smallest dimension on these intake valves, and they're quite a bit varied. These are in inches. Even from here to here, that is 5/1000ths of an inch. This guy here, 0.3892, 3871, and you know, on the top of the valve, it's 0.3928, and the bottom 0.3845 is the smallest. That's a difference of 0.08 of an inch, which in the scheme of valve stems, that is way too much. So there's way too much taper on these intake valves. Unfortunately, that's bad news. I had very little taper, less than 0.001 of an inch on the exhaust valves. So whoever rebuilt this engine last probably only replaced the exhaust valves, and they left the intake valves undone. So the engine apparently did run with those valves, and I'm not surprised. I did find a wear limit in the spec book, which is 0.12 millimeters, which is about 0.005 of an inch. So that's the wear limit between the valve guide and the valve stem in the radial direction. So if I'm getting, you know, 0.08 of an inch, that's more than the wear limit on just the stem alone, not even considering the shape of the guide, which I'm sure the guide is probably worn out too. I'm gonna measure the guides next, but I'm gonna take a break at the moment, see what kind of inventory I have for intake valves, go from there. I've checked a whole bunch of extra valves that I had, and all of them have the same problem. All of these intake valves have a taper here towards the bottom. So this must be a common issue, and I'm gonna have to buy some new ones. Okay, now for the not so fun job of just cleaning all the junk off of these heads so I can check the valve guides. I'm sure they're probably worn, but I am gonna measure them just to find out how much. I'm gonna move this outside because I don't want to spray this chemical all over, and I want some better ventilation too. So I'll come back in just a few minutes. Hopefully these will look a little better. I'm back, and the good news is the heads are cleaner, but one of the heads has a big problem. It's cracked. It's got a crack between the spark plug hole here and the intake valve. And these cracks are deep. You know, you can't run it like this. I mean, this technically was a running engine. It couldn't have been running very well. I have another head that I could potentially use, so I'm gonna have to pivot and use something else besides this one if I want to get this engine running anytime soon, which I do. All right, this head is in good condition. No damage to the valve seats or anything to do with cracking. No damaged or bent studs. This side is cleaned up well enough to get the valve guide measurements done. I like these telescoping gauges for this. This has these little plungers on the end and their radius so they can measure inside diameters. So they go inside the bore on an angle, you lock this down, and then they sort of snap into the final size. 0.3951. So I'm just going to write this down on the paper here. 0.3951. Oh. Okay, here's the long and short of all these numbers. These numbers are the diameters of the valve guides measured in 2 places at the spring and 2 places at the valve. So if I look at the worst case one, this valve guide is 0.40275 minus the diameter of the valve stem. My valve stems are pretty consistent at 0.3922. That gives a clearance of almost 0.010 of an inch. Now the wear limit I wrote over here, the wear limit is 0.12 millimeters for both the exhaust and the intake, and that translates to 0.0472. That's about 5 thousandths. So my clearance on the exhaust is about twice the wear limit. That is no good. I'm going to have to replace the valve guides on the exhaust. The intake was a little bit closer. The largest number I have is 0.39625. That was at the valve. And that would give, with the similar size valve stem, the valve stems on the intake are a little bit bigger, but it's about 3 to 4 thousandths of an inch, which technically is within the wear limit. But if I'm going to replace the exhaust valve guides, I might as well just replace the intake valve guides at the same time. Okay, if you're curious what 10 thousandths feels like, you can almost see this wiggle on camera. Okay, this is the new head that's not cracked. You know, a lot of guys do this by feel and they just, you know, kind of wiggle things around. I like to use numbers, but this one is feeling pretty loose. So let's measure it and see how it compares to the other head. Okay, I didn't write down as many numbers for this one because I can tell already these are out of spec. All right, so the inspection phase here is done. I'm not going to be able to just bolt these heads up to the engine and let it run. You know, I can't, in good faith, sell this engine to someone in the next few months or year if I know that the valve guides are worn out. And I don't want to drive a car with worn out valve guides either. So that means pretty much a full rebuild, or at least 4 new intake valves, 8 new valve guides, recutting the seats, and potentially having to resurface the sealing surface where it meets the cylinder. Okay, I made these ramps here at a 30-degree angle to support the head at a 30-degree angle, so when it comes time to drill out this exhaust guide, it's going to go straight down on the drill press. It's best to weaken the guide before you just push it out so you don't damage the bore in the cylinder head. Okay, when it's all said and done and I have a valve there inside, see the valve guide is worn and I'm getting an angle of 1.55 you know, depending on how this is so worn that I can switch the angle based on the worn valve guide, but it's about 1 degree off. So when I put this on my drill press, I will verify it on the drill press table, and then I can shim the bottom to get it exactly 0 degrees. So when I'm drilling straight into the valve guide and hopefully not into the cylinder head. That would be bad. This is clamped to my drill press now. You can see these are the little triangles that I made, and this is clamped to the table. There's a shim underneath here to get the angle right. I think I got the angle right. I'm cutting this in 3 different steps, 3 different drill size steps, just so I can sneak up on it and try to really remove most of the guide with the drill bits, and then we'll push the rest out. There's a stop on the drill bit so I don't go all the way through the guide. I want to have a step on the far side so I have something to push against. This is what I did to check the angle. I'm just using this digital level here. So I zero it out on the drill bit, and then I have an old valve guide in here, or I have an old valve in here. And right now this is kind of in the way, but when I put this on here, I'm getting 89.4, which is the closest I could get it with the shims I had to 90 degrees. So that should cut straight down into the valve guide without cutting into the cylinder head. Fingers crossed. This is spinning really slow. Okay, looks like it's cutting all the way around. So let's keep going. I think that's deep enough. Let's switch to the next size drill bit. So I want to knock this one out and see how close it is to the wall of the head. So I'm just using a center punch. Not too much force needed. Okay, the bores are clean. They all look really good except for that one over here that I nicked. So I'm going to take some measurements now and see how they fit with the new guides. I'm measuring these bores the same way with these telescoping gauges and a micrometer. So we fit these in here. .5514. 0.55165. Okay, I now have all the new parts I'm going to need to put these heads back together. So I'm going to measure the new parts and see what kind of interference fit there is when I press these new guides back into the heads. And I also was able to get the intake valves. Remember, the intake valves were severely worn out. So I'm going to measure these, make sure they're going to fit these new valve guides. But a special thank you to Aussie Sales. They were able to get these intake valves to me in time for this video, in time for me to do all the measurements and do the actual sizing I'm going to need to get these to fit correctly back to factory specs. So they went above and beyond to get these valves here on time for this video. So thank you very much. You know, I don't buy a lot of brand new parts, but when I do, I'd like to buy from someone who does restorations, who knows the parts, who actually sells used parts. That's right up my alley. Most of the stuff I get is used, but they are also very knowledgeable, and service was great getting these to me on time. So highly recommend Ausse Sales. I'll put a link in the description below for their website. Thumbs up. The valve guide diameter on the outside is 0.558, 0.556, 0.557, 0.557. That's a little bit less than a 6/1000th of an inch, which to me seems like a pretty tight fit. I'm gonna have to double check the specs. I believe these might be oversized, and that might come in handy because I have to probably fix that little ding I put in here. So at least on that one, I can ream these to the next size over, and then these should fit correctly. So I'm gonna be checking the spec books on that. And then this valve, I'm getting 0.393, 393, 393. Now there needs to be enough clearance here really for oil to get in there, because you need to have lubrication, and if it's so tight the oil can't get in, these two could seize together. So let me measure the inside diameter of this and compare it to this. Okay, 0.3936, 0.3934, 0.3936. 0.3936, and this valve stem 0.39315. Okay, I just subtracted those two measurements between the valve and the valve guide, and I'm getting 0.00045. So that's 4/10,000ths of an inch. I know that is too tight. And this valve guide hasn't even been pressed in. When it gets pressed into the head, it's probably gonna shrink a little bit, just like the kingpin bushings. They shrunk when I pushed those in. So the interference fit is gonna shrink this down. That's okay. It just means that I'm gonna have to hone these a little bigger. I think the target clearance for the intake valves is over 1/1000th of an inch, like 1.5 thousandths. So 1/2 thousandths is not enough. These, if I were to just push them in like they are, they would seize. So I got to go back and look at the factory workshop manuals and come up with a game plan on pressing these valve guides in, and also honing the valve guides. So it's the external bore and the internal bore have to be sized to fit my heads, and also sized to fit those valves. Also, last week's video was about the lower end and circulating some oil through the crankcase and purging out some of that old assembly lube. I've been doing that each night. I've probably run that 6 or 7 times. Each one is about a gallon of oil. So I've run like 8 or 9 gallons of oil through it. They're each 5 quarts. So that seems to be going pretty well. The oil's coming out nice and clean. If you haven't seen that video yet, it's linked right after this one. So that was part 1. This is part 2. I'm gonna keep doing multiple parts on this until this engine runs. Fingers crossed.